Hey there YouTube, welcome back to Artichoke Dip. My name is Rob, solo RPG gamer and tabletop board gamer. And in this video, I want to have a cup of coffee, me and you one-on-one, talking about wilderness. Now, I'm remaking this video because back earlier in the year, I had posted a video about wilderness and I was listening to Alice in Chains while I made it. And of course, YouTube at that point gave me a copyright strike and told me you can't do that and deleted all the audio. Well, I was pretty sore about it for a while, but I figured here we are towards the end of 2018, going into a new year. Maybe it's time just to bury the hatchet, let things at that point rest, and what the heck, make another video and talk about some of the points from that one. So before I get into this video, there's a couple of disclaimers I gotta get out of the way. First thing is, everything you see here, everything I talk about on my channel, this is all my hard-earned money. Nobody's endorsing me to sit here and talk to you about role-playing games or board games. These are just games that I enjoy to play because I'm passionate about tabletop gaming. So it gives me the ability to be brutally honest about a game and tell you if they're worth spending your hard-earned money to put them on your table to play, or maybe if they're better left sitting on the shelf where you saw them. Second thing is, if you enjoy my video, hit that like button. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe, hit the little bell icon, and every time I upload a new video, you will hear about it. So let's talk about wilderness, what wilderness is and what we can use wilderness for. Now, of course, when I talk about wilderness, there always is the miniature aspect of it, with obviously the trees on your tabletop to represent a 3D representation of the tree, and it can be used for cover as well as a place to hide and ambush your encounters as they come through, or a place for the encounters to hide and ambush your characters as they come through. It just all depends on how you use that. But for me, I like to go a little bit more further into depth with wilderness and use a lot more than that. But of course, that all depends on the type of gamer you are. Now, if you're a role player, R-O-L-E, and you enjoy a more immersive story with your role-playing games and you want to know more about the world and everything in it, then definitely wilderness will work to your advantage. But if you're a R-O-L-E player, role player, where you just like combat, pretty much kicking in the door of the goblin's lair, while they sit there eating dinner, discussing their plans, and, you know, and at that point the door kicks in, they are all murdered, and all their life savings is looted, then maybe the wilderness might not be quite for you. Maybe you're the type of role player that you like the backdrop of a story there, but you're more interested in the combat mechanics other than the story. Either way that you do it, it's okay. It's a solo experience, and you do it and detail it to the way that you enjoy to do it because it's your RPG, it's your story. But if you're like me, and you enjoy a little bit more detail to your role-playing, then maybe, just maybe, you'll get some ideas here how to add into your game, maybe some things you never thought about before that will add more depth into them. Alright, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about wilderness and what wilderness really is. Wilderness should be vast, unexplored, a mystery. And at that point, the encounters that you encounter in the wilderness should, as a matter of fact, reflect that. They should be, at that point, very rare and frightening and very, well, sometimes powerful. Now, you could always, at that point, put roaming bands of goblins or orcs across your landscape that you encounter time to time, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, when it comes to the wilderness encounter, I would rather encounter I don't know, green dragons, or at that point owl bears, or perhaps the occasional night hag. Something that's going to be higher up there in the challenge rating, but once it's defeated, pay off a lot more in experience. And not only that, if it has a lair, at that point, your characters have access maybe to some weapons, armor, and treasure that may be above their level, we should say, of where you're at in your game. And that really does, at that point, give you an advantage and add more into the game, add more depth into the game, and adding more to the story. But there's a lot more to the wilderness than just the encounters to think about. The other thing that I really like to focus on in my solo RPGs with wilderness is weather, seasons. These are things here that maybe you have given some thought about, or maybe you haven't, and I think maybe we should discuss them a little bit further. Let's shoot a little bit higher above the tree line there. There we go. So let's use a really good example here of how I use weather with my solo RPGs. And maybe you can use them in yours as well. So let's take a look at this map right here. Let's say your characters have traveled from this point to this point and back again. As a matter of fact, they have done that several times. Through the summer and the fall months, as a matter of fact, they've done it so many times that they know that trail like the back of their hand. But let's say they travel back and they go there, they complete a quest that's taken longer than what they anticipated. And now it's the dead of winter and they're ready to go home. So at that point, when they go back to that trail that was so simple before all the snow, well, things have changed. At that point, snow could be knee deep, restricting their movement to half movement, and not only that, blowing snow drifts could change the landscape drastically. And if you're like me, it's got a high probability of them getting lost. That's a high probability, 88%. And they would definitely get lost, venturing off out and further into the wilderness. And of course, there's other things to consider. The extreme cold, the lack of, at that point, green vegetation to be able to forage from, and frozen water supplies would make the adventure at that point much more difficult. Now, some people may play and think that at this point that their characters fend for themselves, so they don't pay a whole lot of attention to how much water they consume or rations or anything else like that, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that type of playing. A lot of people do it that way. Or if you're the type of person that you really, really like a more in-depth role play, at that point you're going to pay closer attention to that. Let me give you an example. So in The Lord of the Rings, at that point when Frodo and Sam were heading towards Mount Doom to get rid of the Ring of Power, if you remember, Sam had a limited amount of llama's bread to share between them. And when Gollum decided to set up Sam, take the llama's bread out and throw it away, pinning Sam for being a traitor, one of two things that happened. A, it put Frodo in a bad situation because he was deceived, and their food supply that should have lasted them at that point was exhausted. So those are all things to consider that can affect your characters in the wilderness and add for a much more interesting role-playing session. Now, typically when I create my own RPG, because just me personally, I know some people really enjoy pre-made adventure modules, and they like them a lot. The reason why, everything work is done for you. It's all there. Your maps are there, your story's there. The only thing you got to do is open it up, read it, and play it. But the one thing for me that I don't like about it is I got to read through it. I know how it ends, and it's taken a lot of the mystery and a lot of the excitement out of it because I know what to expect, which is why I like generally doing random tables and keeping everything a mystery and a surprise as it unfolds and happens in my games, which keeps it more interesting because at that point I am literally in the dark. I don't know what to expect next. But that's my personal take on that and not yours. If you enjoy using pre-generated modules, game on, my friends. That's what this is all about. A solo experience about you having fun. And maybe coffee. So we see how you can use the seasons at that point to add a lot more depth into your story, and at that point can either help or hinder your characters. Now, what if it was the summer months and your characters will say, using this map again, traveling from here to the next city. But it's summertime, but it's a blazing hot summer. It's also in the middle of a drought, which would mean all of the, at that point, vegetation would be dormant and pretty much dead, unuseful, and water supplies at that point would be very scarce, and whatever open water sources there were, you can almost willing to bet with a high probability that either someone or something is willing to defend it to their death before they give it up to the likes of your adventurers coming in to refill their water skins. And there's something else to think about as well of how seasons can affect the wilderness and add in to the story. And not only that, situations like that can add multiple intersecting storylines into your main quest line and just expand your map and your game even bigger, giving it a lot more endless possibilities and keep moving, at that point, the story ever forward. So, the other thing to consider, unless you foresee your world as being completely flat and without water, are water sources. And of course, water sources are everywhere in my worlds. As a matter of fact, I make random tables to where I have rivers, lakes, seas, oceans, bogs, swamps, and at that point they crop up everywhere across my maps. Rivers particularly, I really like. They can be very unique. You can at that point have slow, shallow moving rivers, which are a great oasis for your characters. They can camp near the shores, which give them readily access to water to be able to fill and drink and do whatever they have to do. Plus, it's pretty easy for them to fish as well and get food. Or you could have a river at that point that's very deep, moving very quickly, and it's pretty dangerous for your characters to get too close to it. As a matter of fact, if they were to fall in, the undertow could take them, and at that point carry them out to a larger body of water, be a lake, ocean, or what have you. Another thing to consider with open bodies of water like that is that old saying, where there's water, there's life, my friends. And maybe not the kind of life you really want to experience. So, with open bodies of water in wilderness, what other type of encounters will you encounter there? It could be frogmen, could be mermaids, could be a plethora of horrible nastiness that lives deep underneath the waves of a lake. Maybe there's a reason why not too many people go near that lake, and maybe your characters venture in to find out why. That's the cool thing about wilderness, and what I love about it is it's so vast and gives your imagination the ability to be able to put whatever you want wherever you want. And you should be the same way. Don't feel as if that you are restrained or chained down to certain rule sets of an RPG game, because you're really not. And as I said before, books like these, which is nothing more than a campaign setting to help you, to give you, at that point, key points on the map, tell you what to expect there, It's not written in stone. As a matter of fact, this is nothing more than a tool to help unleash your imagination, and you should use it as such. Don't feel as if the rules at that point have shackled your imagination and imprisoned it, because at that point, the only one that's going to suffer is going to be you. And I really can't stress that enough. When it comes to a role-playing game, you got to remember something. Whatever you put into it, you're going to get back out. If you put very little effort into it, you really can't expect high adventure to come out of it. And that's just the way it is. The more you put into it, the more you will get back out of it. And that is very true. And I have found that out over the years of me gaming, and that's the reason why I love Wilderness so much. Now, I'm not saying I don't like Dungeon Delves. I do love Dungeon Delves. But the way that I do mine is I focus on the Wilderness, and then at that point, I pepper dungeons and ruins, and at that point, abandoned castles and kingdoms and everything else across my map. It just opens up more possibilities. Now, you always got to remember to keep a good journal as you create your map. Write down what you found there, who you met there, and what they have to offer. Because you never know, a few gaming sessions later, you may want to venture back through. You can always go back through your notes and say, haha, I remember coming through here. At that point, we met so-and-so, and he could really help us out in the bind right now. Now, another thing I want to talk about with Wilderness is as you move through the Wilderness, at that point, peppering your map with small settlements. But be careful not to fill them up too much. Put in there what you need at the time and leave the vast amount of it blank. I do this for a particular reason. The reason why I do it is if I ever pass back through that area, and let's say I do need healing or the aid of a cleric, I can always at that point drop a temple into that area. But the rules, by the way that I play mine, once I do put something in that particular area, it's set in stone and it doesn't go away. So that's why I say I always leave it vastly blank before I just go in and say, here's a village, and fill up everything at the time with what's there. You can do that, but to a certain extent, when you play solo, you really do limit yourself. Unless you enjoy that type of playing to where your resources are stretched extremely thin, and everything is a struggle every single day to make it through. That at that point, that would be the way you'd really want to play. So, there are some great tools out there that we have that we can use at that point to help heighten our game experience with Wilderness. Some of them old, some of them you can still get in print today. Well, let's talk about those a little bit. So, one of them that I really liked, and it really helped me with Wilderness and really helped me appreciate Wilderness when I started out gaming. And every time I sit down and I thumb through this book, I learn something new that really inspires my imagination to incorporate into my games. And that is the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Wilderness Survival Guide. Now, this book was written for a game master, and it poses you with a lot of questions. For players alike, too, I should say. Certain things that you normally, I would say, wouldn't think about, but in here, they kind of do make you think about it. So let's get back to the seasons. So let's say, here's our map, here's our travel route for our characters. Now, let's say it's springtime, and our characters are traveling back and forth. But it gets late and they decide to make camp because now it's too dark to continue going. So it's been raining all day. It's been raining a lot. They want to make a fire. How readily available is decent firewood in order for them to make a fire and sustain it? And if they do find wood, how much of a fuel source do they have to keep sustaining the fire throughout the night? Here's something else for food for thought. let's say that they overcome those first two obstacles. Not only do they find firewood, and they find enough to sustain a fire overnight, what else in that area, when that fire is built, and that warm glow of the fire can be seen for miles around, attracts other things, particularly in the wild, that know where there's fire, there's people, and where there's people, there's a tasty meal. So those are all things to consider and think about with your solo RPG, and particularly with some game aids like this that can help you with that and really help get your imagination going and figure out how to add different things into your game. Now, you shouldn't limit yourself at that point to just relying on one particular book. As a matter of fact, there's a lot out there. Everything from Dungeon Master guides, and depending on the role-playing game system you're playing, I imagine there's a supplement for just about anything you can think of as far as wilderness travel. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. Now, there's going to be some game systems out there I'm going to say there probably isn't. A couple of them I'll bring up, like Basic Fantasy. Basic Fantasy is, well, basic. It's kind of a starting point for the new budding RPG player. But if you've been playing RPGs for a while and you want something, you want more, then at that point I would suggest looking into picking up a copy of this. It's been out for quite a long time, and you can still find them used. As a matter of fact, they're out of print, and I think the last time this thing was printed, gosh, late 80s, early 90s. That's going a ways back. The other one I want to talk about, and I have talked about this quite a bit, and it's still in print, you can get it. It's published by AEG, and it's called the Toolbox. Now, for those of you that are into the newer editions of D&D, you'll love this because, well, this is made for the newer editions of D&D. Everything's for a D20 system. And this will help you generate, considering they're all random tables, everything from wilderness encounters, how to forage and hunt, all the way up to what you could expect to find in cities and towns and settlements, kingdoms, and even character motivations and NPC motivations. It's a rather interesting book. And that can also help out with your wilderness a lot too. As you explore and open up your map, and you add in more settlements, it can help you detail them settlements, place NPCs in there, and make your world become more alive. Which, that's what it's all about, isn't it? At the end of the day, yeah. Create a campaign, make it come alive, adventurers have a good time, kick in doors, slay goblins, loot goblins, become rich, sooner or later have enough wealth at that point to declare themselves of nobility, build a kingdom, at that point rule over the land, impose taxes, and okay, I think maybe that's going a little too far. But let's say you're the type of gamer, maybe, like I said, you like the backdrop of a story, you're really not all that interested in the wilderness thing. You like dungeon delving. You like going into ruins and dungeons and going 20 levels below into the darkest realms of your world, seeking out the foulest creatures that can be found. They, however, did come out with a book for you guys too as well. That one's called The Dungeoneer's Survival Guide. Same thing as the wilderness, it'll ask you a lot of questions, some things that maybe you haven't thought of. Such as when you're in a dungeon, not only do you lose track of time, day, night, months, so on and so forth while you're underneath there, but what about water sources? When your water runs out, you may find water sources in the dungeon. But here's food for thought. Is it fresh water you can drink, or is the water polluted or poisoned that may kill your characters? There's some food for thought. Now, the cool thing about the book is it goes through and it explains a lot to you, and the way I like how it's presented is, in a sense, it kind of, at that point, asks you certain questions to kind of help you integrate a lot of this into your game system. It goes into, let's use this for an example, rates of climbing. It's going to ask you, are you trying to climb a non-slippery or a slightly slippery or a really slippery surface? And if you're in a dungeon, this is something you got to think about. What are the walls like? Are the walls made of stone? Is this an old stronghold that has been abandoned a long time ago and overtaken by time and creatures? Or is it in a cave? If it's in a cave at that point, you would have to imagine it would be extremely damp from erosion, and the walls would be slippery. Or is this just simply a tunnel system carved out deep within the earth with soil walls and just at that point nasty, moldy, dark, bleh, type of situation that you're in here? And then at that point, it's going to give you some examples of how your characters could scale them walls. So, if they were trying to, at that point, scale a sloped wall on a very slippery surface, they could only go about 15 feet per round, given that at that point they don't lose their grip and slide back down the wall. Or, even worse, while climbing out, maybe the wall became weak, there was a cave-in that crumbled, impeding their way, and then they have to find another way through. All things that add more depth into your game, some things to think about. So, wilderness, dungeoneering, ruins, castles, kingdoms, all of these things at this point add into your solo RPG. And it's why I like making my own RPG, and rather than using a pre-made published one. And like I said, I'm not condoning pre-made published ones at all. Absolutely not. Some of them are good. I still use one that's my favorite, and that would be Ravenloft. I love Ravenloft, and I revisit it quite often just because I love the story and I love everything about it. And it works quite well with 4 Against Darkness. But when I want to play my RPGs, when I want to play RuneQuest, I want to play D&D or Palladium Fantasy, at that point, I want to be left in the dark until I discover what's ever ahead of me. I don't want to know what's coming up next. It's kind of like reading the end of a book first. It just spoils everything for you. So, one other thing I want to talk about with Wilderness are random tables, creating your own tables. And when you create your tables, of course you should have your encounters. And, of course, you should have your terrain features. So, always randomly changing. You'll want to integrate mountains, bodies of water, forests, whether they're light forest, heavy forest, deserts, waste, bogs, swamps, rolling hills and plains, all of them, which make up for a good fantasy setting. But there's one other thing I have not yet talked about that you could integrate into your random tables to add more flavor into your game. Now, one of the things I do like about the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, particularly with the 2nd edition and even the 3rd edition, I have not seen the 5th edition yet to be able to tell you if it's the same or not, but I suspect it is. And that is moon phases. That's one thing about the wilderness I don't think a lot of people think about. And you could always add those in to your game system. Now, with moon phases, eclipse, full moons, and other such things can add in very interesting aspects to your game. Here's some food for thought. So what if an eclipse occurs? And once that eclipse happens, what if there's a dragon, or even worse, what if there's a demon lord that has been bound and chained in some dark subterranean area? And when the eclipse happens, the binds come off, and he's set free upon the world at that point. That would definitely add some more flavor into your game, now wouldn't it? Now besides that, you could add more into it, such as, what if only on a particularly full moon, a certain herb can be harvested as a special ingredient that your magic user needs at that point to take that scroll and transfer that scroll into a permanent spell, into a spell book. Which it all gets you back to, at that point, passage of time. Keeping track of your time and your movement as you move through the map, or any map for that matter. Giving Wilderness a much more dynamic and expansive solo RPG experience. I know for me anyway it does, but maybe some of these ideas will help you out and inspire you at that point to use them for yours. So, hope this helped, guys. A cup of coffee, a little conversation, a little bit of Wilderness, and off you go. Now, the one thing I want to talk about before I end this video, even though I showed you those books, and they are very good books to have, don't feel like you need to run out and buy them. Matter of fact, only thing these things do is just pose you with some questions and tables to help you. Now, you got to remember something. All RPG games are a product of your imagination. And like I said before, do not let rules or rule sets bind your imagination. Let it run wild. And in doing so, the more, how should I put this? The wider scope that you have of a very vivid imagination towards your gaming is the more you're going to get out of your game, because you're putting more into it at that point. I think that made sense. Pretty sure. Anyways, guys, I think I covered Wilderness enough. I think I gave you guys enough to think about here with this, and how to integrate that Wilderness into your games. Go a little bit further with it, and I think you're going to find overall, at that point, you're going to have more enjoyable and memorable game sessions. Yeah, I think with that, I'm going to end this video there, and maybe until next time. New Year's is coming up. It's going to be a brand new year, and have to see what the new year brings for us, huh? Well, with that being said, my friends, game on, have fun, and take what I said into consideration. Give it a thought. And maybe you want to try to integrate some of that into your games with your Wilderness, and see how it works out. See if the little investment of imagination you put into it at that point gives you a big return towards your storyline and your characters. Well, my friends, if you liked my video, please click the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the little bell icon, and you will be notified every time I upload a new video, which I'm hoping to be more frequent. But we'll see how things go in the new year, and we'll move on from there. Alright, my friends, game on. Until next time, Start a Choke Dip out.